Hi everyone. So this lecture is all about continuing what we learned last time, which was an introduction to major key signatures. So a couple lectures ago, we learned about how to organize pitch into one of our units of time, major scales. Last time we learned about how to take the accidentals of those scales and move them into key signatures. So today we're going to pick up where we left off, do some more practice of this, and then also learn how to write key signatures. So we identified them primarily last time. This time we're going to go ahead and just create them off the top of our heads. So I'm going to go ahead and do what I did last time, where I will give you a moment to basically pause the recording here, try this out, and then regroup with me. So this is scale writing practice. This is pretty straightforward. This is from a couple days ago. Given the first note, which as we learned the last time is also called the tonic pitch, complete these major scales. So I've given you a couple different options here. You could either pause and try all of them, or you could just like wait for me to do, pause between each one. Here's a keyboard for your reference, and remember the pattern of whole steps and half steps for major scales. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So right at the top, go ahead and pause, and then we'll try this one out. So this scale here is in bass clef. Way down here, this is C sharp. It's a very, very low note. Now, if you start on C sharp, you'd go up whole step to D sharp, whole step to E sharp, because we need a whole step here. So C sharp, D sharp, E sharp. We wouldn't want to call it F because then we'd skip E natural. Half step to F sharp, whole step to G sharp, whole step to A sharp, beg your pardon. A whole step to B sharp, again, because we don't want to skip B and then have two C's. And then finally a half step to C sharp. So C sharp major is a scale that has every single note sharp. Now this kind of makes sense if you think about it, because if C major is all natural, if we take that first note and move it up a half step, or conversely move it down a half step with an accidental, in order to get that pattern, we'd have to have every single other note move in the same direction to accommodate. So what that means is that while C major is the completely neutral scale, C sharp major is completely sharp, and C flat major is completely flat. So that can be kind of useful to remember for all of you. So go ahead and pause your video and try this next one out. So this scale here starts on D flat in treble clef. D flat major, we have D flat, whole step to E flat, whole step to F, half step to G flat, whole step to A flat, whole step to B flat, whole step to C, and finally a half step to D flat. Now, if you recall, these two scales actually have a certain relationship that we talked about last time. These are enharmonic scales, because if you look at the keyboard, C sharp and D flat are both the same black key. So these scales, besides their range, one is lower, one is higher, of course, these will sound the same. They're just written differently. Now, there's a variety of reasons why we might see this, but both of these scales are in common usage. So they both have different times and places, essentially. We can't really get into why exactly right now, but both of these scales will sound the same, but are just written completely different. So we have to keep track of both of them, even though that they might, you might wonder, well, like, why do we have multiple scales that are written differently but sound the same? Again, it's a pretty complicated issue, but at the end of the day, it comes down to how scales are related to one another. If you're dealing with a flat key signature and want to move to D flat, that would make a lot of sense. You're going from flat to flat. If you wanted to move from a flat key signature to the key D flat on the piano and write it as C sharp instead, that can be kind of confusing, right? So a lot of the times, why we would write a scale one way or another comes down to the convenience and the communication of the kind of musical material there. So I'll leave it there for now. Like I said, it could get even more complicated than that, but in any case. So try this next one out. So go ahead and pause your video. So this here, we're in bass clef, this is B. So we have B, C sharp, D sharp, E. So whole step, half step. Whole step to F sharp, whole step to G sharp, whole step to A sharp, and finally a half step back where we started at B. So again, pretty straightforward. At this point, we're getting pretty good at this. We've been doing this for about a week now. Next up, we have G flat. Okay, go ahead and try this one out. Pause your video. So I'll just reveal the answer here. So here's G flat. Notice that almost every single note is flat. We have a whole step between G flat and A flat, between A flat and B flat, a half step to C flat. We need C flat here because we already have a B flat, we already have a B, and we need a half step. So in order to get that half step, we take a C and then lower it down, even though it looks like B on the keyboard. Up a whole step to D flat, whole step to E flat, whole step to F, and half step to G flat up there at the top. So last but not least, try to scale out. So go ahead and pause your video. So here is F sharp. I'll review the answer here. You know, more of the same. Whole, whole, half to B natural, whole, whole, whole to E sharp, because we already have an E, or sorry, already have an F, and then half to F sharp. Once again, another pair here of enharmonic keys. G flat and F sharp are the same key on the keyboard. So key signatures, we talked about this last time. This is the more important thing for today. Key signatures transfer the accidentals we need to make scales to the left near the clef. Key signatures allow us to use less accidentals and to quickly identify the key of a piece. The order of flats is B, E, A, D, G, C, F, and the order of sharps is the order of flats backwards. If you recall, we had a mnemonic for the order of flats, which was better eat a darn good chicken fajita, or whatever you want to come up with. That's not like a rule or anything. So we had two different processes for identifying the tonic pitch. For flat keys, if we had, say, 4 flats, we'd go to the second to last flat, the penultimate flat, the third flat, and that would tell us your tonic note. If you take that note and put it up, up to the next register, that would give you your scale. For sharp keys, you go to the last sharp in your key signature. That gives you scale degree 7. You go up a half step, and you get your tonic there. Two different processes, so make sure to really keep those straight. That's really important. So, key signatures and bass clef. For the sake of clarity, we've primarily looked at key signatures and treble clef up until now and including last lecture. The order of sharps and flats are the same. You just have to adjust where the accidentals fall to account for where pitches differ. So notice we have B, E, A, D, G, C, and F flat, F, C, G, D, A, E, and B sharp, beg your pardon. Notice that over here, it's the exact same written configuration, the same order. They're just placed in different spots because bass clef has notes in different places than treble clef. So just pay attention to that. But it's the same basic principle. Now, these specific configurations of accidentals, how they look both in treble clef and in bass clef, is actually really important once we start writing key signatures, which we'll do in a little bit, actually. So this particular configuration is really important. It's not just random. They're written in a certain order and in a certain place, so that way it's easy to be communicated to the performer. So let's do some practice. I will go ahead and introduce a key, pause, review the answer. So this is a review from last time. We just talked about the processes. I'll review these as we go. So pause your video, try this one out. So this one, we have all the sharps basically. F, C, G, D, A, E, and B sharp. B sharp, up a half step, is not D flat, is not C, but C sharp. So this is C sharp major's key signature. All the sharps, as we kind of talked about earlier. So pause your video and try this one out. For this one, 3 flats. The second from the last flat here is E flat. Well, that's our tonic. E flat major. We're good to go. So try this one out. Now this one, if you may recall, is a trick question. This is the one key signature I asked you to memorize because this one breaks our rule a little bit. This is F major. That's the one key signature that doesn't really work with our identification system here. It's the one exception. So try this one out. 5 sharps major. Go ahead and pause your video. So 5 sharps major, we have F, C, G, D, and A sharp. A sharp up a half step gives us B. B natural. So this is B major. Over here, we have 7 flats. Go ahead and pause your video and try this one out. So we have B, E, A, D, G, C, and F flat. The penultimate flat, the second to the last flat, is C flat. And here's what I talked about earlier, where C sharp major is all the sharps, C flat major is all the flats, and C major is nothing. So that's what I mean when I was talking about that earlier. 1 sharp. Try this one out. Go ahead and pause your video. Now, this isn't a problem for us. The last sharp is the only sharp. So F sharp up a half step gives us the note G. So we're good to go there. Last but not least, try this one out. 6 flats major. So this one, we have B flat, E flat, A flat, D flat, and G flat's the second to the last one. G flat major. Again, I went through these kind of quickly, but you know, with practice, this gets pretty quick. And again, there's not that many scales. There's really only 15 options for major scales for us. So it's not an infinite list to deal with. So again, if you're still struggling, now might be a good time to pause and do some extra practice at the musictheory.net resource that I mentioned in the last video, because they have exercises where you can get quick flashcard-like identification practice in treble clef and in bass clef. So let's identify keys and repertoire. I have a piece here. It's a really wonderful piece called The Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square. We've got a key signature here. Now notice that the key signature is duplicated on every staff so the performer can remember what accidentals are in play. So let's tie a few threads together. First of all, pause the video and tell me what key is this in. We've got 3 flats. What key is that? 3 flats. We have B flat, E flat, and A flat. Second to last is E flat major. So we can write out its scale. This might be, say, in the margins or on a scratch piece of paper. For our purposes, we'll write it out. So go ahead and take a moment, and on your tablet, piece of paper, in your head, wherever, write out the E flat major scale, and you can use our key signature for your accidentals. So what you get should look a little bit like this. E flat, F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D, and E flat again. So we can assign scale degrees. This is pretty simple, assigning essentially 1 to 7 to each of our unique notes. So there we go. Now we've got kind of a roadmap for our scale degrees we can come back to later. Now, we're going to put a pause on that really quickly and count the rhythms for this. Now, why are we doing that? This melody, as you can see, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 measures. Then the melody repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then there's a 10th that it's not here. But it's the same melody twice. The same notes, the same rhythms. So the first time, this chunk here, let's go ahead and count the rhythms. And the second time, we'll do scale degrees. So pause your video. Go ahead and assign scale degrees to all of this. And hint, because we've got 2 quarter note triplets here, it's like a measure of compound time. It's like a measure of 6/4. So that'll give you a hint for how to count this, for instance. So go ahead and pause your video now. So here's the counting. We have a little pickup on the and of 4, but here it is. 1, 2, 3, 4's in the dot, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1 lolly, 2 lolly, 1. And then that has all 3 beats in it. 1, 2, and 3. 4 and 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4 and 1 and 2, 3, 4, 1, half note, 3, half note, and then 1. Again, went through that quickly, but it's all review from a couple weeks ago. So pretty straightforward, simple time counting in 4/4 here. So now go ahead and pause your video and assign scale degrees to this. Shouldn't take you terribly too long. So the numbers we're going to assign now for scale degrees look totally different. 3, 3, 1, 1, 5, 5, 3, 1, 1, 6, 6, 6, 7, 7, 7, 1. Again, we're not doing counting now, and I have it in a different color to highlight that. This is telling us pitch, 3 to 1. It's an E flat major. That's the tonic pitch. We're rising up to the tonic pitch. We get higher and higher and higher. 5, 3, 1, 6, 7, 1. 1, 7, 5, 6, 4, 5, 1, 5, 4, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. Again, we begin basically on 1. We start a little above, and then we work our way all the way up to 1 at the top here, and then work our way down to 1 at the bottom. It's a pretty common shape that we see in a lot of melodies and a lot of pieces. 1 is the most important note. We begin and end on 1, and it all fits within the notes of our major scale. So let's take a listen to this recording. It's a really wonderful piece. The first time through, listen for the rhythms in particular and the counting that you just assigned. When we get to this phrase here, listen for the scale degrees, how some are higher, some are lower, how the 1 down here and the 1 up here sound the same, they're just in different vertical places. So let's take a listen to this.
That certain night, the night we met, there was magic abroad in the air. There were angels dining at the Ritz, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I may be right, I may be wrong, perfectly willing to swear that when you turned and smiled at me, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square.
I forgot to mention, he takes some liberties with how he does rhythms for the first part, but that's the basic gist of it. So again, we can do kind of a lot already. We can identify its treble clef, the counting. We can talk all about how this is phrased out. We can talk about tuplets. We can talk about simple rhythms. We can do pitch. We can do scale degrees. There's a lot that we can do already. So this is kind of a form of, analysis, a term that we'll come back to later on in the course. So, writing key signatures. This is pretty important to kind of tie in threads from last time. Writing key signatures. A question you may encounter is this. What is the key signature for blank X major? The answer to this would involve writing out the required key signature. You'd have to know how to write out the number of sharps or flats given the asked for tonic. This is pretty straightforward, actually. We just have to reverse our process of identification. Now, straightforward doesn't mean easy, but it is relatively straightforward. Before practicing this, let's emphasize an aspect of how we actually write these key signatures. Writing your accidentals in the wrong place, perhaps the right pitches, but not in the right place on the staff, isn't the end of the world, but this is standardized. There is no flexibility on this. For instance, if you write a B flat, it has to be here in treble clef. If you write an E flat, it has to be here, not down here, not in a different order. Just because you have 7 different flats, they still have to follow the order of flats. That's still very, very important for its role as communication. We've talked about this a lot. Notation as communication. So let's have a little visual kind of mnemonic to remember how we write these orders. So for flat key signatures, we can think of it kind of like a staircase. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. It looks kind of like a sideways staircase. So we start with B flat in the middle line of treble clef or on the second from the bottom line in bass clef. And then we go up to the next E flat, down to A flat, up to D flat, and so on like that. So that's how you can remember. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Again, kind of like the steps of a staircase. For sharp key signatures, it's a little bit different. We've got 2 down, 3 down, 2 down. F up top, not down here, not on the space, but up here on the line. F sharp down to C sharp, 2 down. G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, 3 down. E sharp, B sharp, 2 down. Again, this is the most complicated version of all of these. You might have fewer flats or fewer sharps. The pattern is still the same. You just remove sharps or flats as necessary. So that's the kind of way to write it. Now, for the time being, we're not going to be super critical of how you write them if you have the right accidentals. But eventually, having them written in the right place and in the right order will be a deal breaker, basically, if you don't do that, and will actually cost you some points. Because this is standardized. It's very specific. So we have to be really detail-oriented with this in order to kind of, learn this kind of notational tradition that we've been learning in this class. So let's write flat key signatures. The process for identifying a flat key is to go to its penultimate flat. If we know our order of flats really well, reversing this should be pretty straightforward. For example, write the key signature for A flat major. Now, if A flat is your second from the last flat, your penultimate flat, B flat, E flat, A flat, you have one more flat after A flat, that means that you'll have how many flats? 4, specifically B flat, E flat, A flat, and D flat. Hope we all followed me. So if we know what the tonic is, we have to go 1 extra flat in our order of flats, and that's going to tell us the number that we have total, and then you write them in order. So again, you really need to know your order of flats for this, but it's pretty straightforward, hypothetically. We'll do some more practice later in a bit too, if you're a little bit confused still. Sharp key signatures are a little bit more complicated, just a little bit. It's the same as identifying it backwards in that in order to identify a sharp key, we go up a half step from the final sharp. Now, for a sharp key, we need to keep our order of sharps in mind because we have to go backwards. So for instance, write the key signature for A major. We have to go down a half step from A, but change letter names. You don't want to do this. Okay, A down a half step is A flat. Wrong. you have to change letter names. A down a half step is G sharp. Where is G sharp in an order of sharps? F, C, G, third. So that tells us how many sharps we need. Sorry, that's a typo. How many sharps we need. And these specific sharps. F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. F, C, and G. Again, G sharp up a half step gives us A. We can kind of test our work too if you ever wanted to. You can kind of identify the key signatures that you've written and see if they fit what you would expect them to be. So that's the process. Again, it's not necessarily easy, but it is straightforward. It is just undoing a process that we learned last time. So before we do some practice, here's some hints and observations for all of you. How do you know if you need to write sharps or flats? This is actually pretty straightforward, thankfully. If a tonic pitch has accidentals, obviously those are necessary. So if you're asked to write D flat major, it must have flats in it. There's a flat in the tonic. If you are asked to write F sharp major, it must have sharps in it. F sharp, it has a sharp in the tonic. If the tonic pitch has a natural name, A, D, E, then that scale is a sharp key. That just happens to work out that way because of the way that our scales are designed, the way that they happen to work out, that natural names, for the most part, are sharp keys. The sole exceptions are two we've talked about already. C major, which we know has nothing, and F major, which was an exception already. So, pretty straightforward, actually. If ever in doubt with writing your key signature, you could write a scale with your tonic and then think of a keyboard and test to see if you have the right pattern of half steps and whole steps to check your work. Again, a lot of this process can be reversed or kind of duplicated in different ways to check your process and to check if you've got the right answer, which is pretty handy. So let's do some practice here. I have now given you a clef and I've given you a key signature. So I want you to give me the correct number of sharps or flats for each of these. So just like we've been doing, I'll go ahead and pause the video, I will keep going, but you can pause the video, try it out, and then I'll reveal the answer. So go ahead and try out D major. What accidentals do I need for D major? Go ahead and pause. So D major, it's a natural note name, which means we'll need sharps. D down a half step is not D flat, but is C sharp. C sharp is F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, and B sharp. Is the second sharp in an order of sharps. Therefore, we have two sharps, for instance. F major. Don't even pause for this one. This is the exception that you should remember. F major is the one rule that breaks all of these. Just one flat. Now in bass clef, B flat is this line down here. So you have to write the B flat down here, not on the middle line like treble clef. That is technically incorrect. So D flat major. We know we're going to need flats. It's in the key signature. So pause your video and try this one out. So our order of flats is B, E, A, D, G, C, and F. B, E, A, D. That's 4 flats. That's our second to the last flat though, so we need one more. D flat major has 5 flats. B, E, A, D, and G flat. Okay, go ahead and try E major out. Pause your video. E major is a natural note name, which suggests it's going to have sharps in it. So E down a half step gives us not E flat, but D sharp. Our order is F, C, G, D, A, E, and B. So we have F sharp, F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. That's the note that we got to by going down a half step. E major is going to have 4 sharps in it. F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp. F sharp major. We know we're going to need sharps. So go ahead and try this one out. Okay, so for a variety of reasons, F sharp major is always really tricky for students. Because going down a half step from F sharp gives us F? No. Gives us E sharp. In order of sharps, we have F, C, G, D, A, and E sharp is number 6. So F sharp major has 6 sharps in it. But that 6th sharp, that scale degree 7, is E sharp. A note that a lot of us usually struggle with because of its weird enharmonic trickery on the keyboard. So, B flat major, we know we'll need flats. Go ahead and pause the video and try this one out. So, B flat is the first flat in the order of flats. So that's the second to the last one. We just have to go one more. B flat, E flat. 2 flats. A pretty standard one, we see that one a lot. Last but not least, we have G major. Pause your video and try this one out. So G major, it's probably going to be a sharp key. It's a natural name, and it's not F or C. G down a half step gives us not G flat, but F sharp. That's the first sharp in the order of sharps. So G sharp only has one sharp in it. If you were to take any of these scales and write all of your letters of your musical alphabet with your tonic pitch at the beginning and at the end, plug in these accidentals, you should get a group of perfectly constructed major scales. So let's do a little bit of a wrap up, and I'll kind of talk about where we're going next. So at this point, we can write any major scale and key signature. We can also look at a piece of music and identify its key and the scale degrees of its melody. We can also look at any piece and describe several aspects of its meter and its rhythms. So next up, we're going to basically do all of that we did this week again and talk about minor scales and minor key signatures and how they relate to major scales we already know. For instance, that'll be kind of the extent of our scale knowledge here. There are so many more scales that exist in the world, but for our purposes, for Western musical genres, most everything is going to be either major or minor. So we've covered half of that already. We'll be turning to minor next time. So after that, we'll build on major and minor scales and talk about intervals, which is a way of describing the distance between any two notes on the keyboard. This is actually really, really useful because it helps us look both at melodies, but also as at chords. Because chords, as we'll find out after the midterm exam, is essentially just the stacking of multiple intervals. So everything's going to kind of build from here. As always, let your TA or I know if you have any questions. Make sure to ask questions at sections. Work on your assignments. They'll be good practice for you. And if you have any difficulties or any sort of issues in the meantime, feel free to let me know. So thank you, everybody, and I'll see you all next time.